we're going to get to our keys to victory here today, LSU versus South Carolina. Just in case that this is your first time listening to us, these are in no specific order. These are just my non-negotiables going into this game. The 5 things that LSU must do to beat South Carolina on Saturday. Number 1, make LaNorris Sellers, the South Carolina quarterback, beat you through the air. Look, we talked about last night. Sellers against Old Dominion was 10 of 23, was highly inefficient at throwing the football, did a really good job at running the football, but I would rather make him one-dimensional, meaning I don't know if I don't come out in the game stacking the box, getting up close to the line of scrimmage, and stopping LaNorris Sellers from running the football and Rocket Sanders from running the football. I don't know if you make LaNorris Sellers drop back 30 times that he can beat you and winning a game. We have not seen him be able to sit in the pocket and win a game from there. Now, there were times last week versus Kentucky where he made some explosive plays. He made the right reads on blown coverages against Kentucky, but he has been very inconsistent. You know, the 11 for 15 that he was against Kentucky last week, even though he had 2 touchdowns, there were massive stretches in the game where he was highly inconsistent. He got bailed out by a couple of pass interference penalties from Kentucky, and therefore I think that if you get into a situation where you stack the line of scrimmage and you make him one-dimensional and make them one-dimensional, it could benefit in your favor. I don't know how good they are at receiver. I think that they're tight end. I think that they do have some playmakers out there. You know, their tight end last week in a blown coverage scored a touchdown. They are big and physical out wide. What do they do with Nick Harbor if he even gets in the game? He has been very ineffective over the last 2 weeks. But I look at South Carolina, and if we come out, or I say we, but if LSU comes out with a victory on Saturday, I think it mainly looks like, to some extent, stay with me, what Kentucky did to them defensively a week ago. You know, I look at South Carolina, like last week, guys, they only had 86 yards rushing. They were not very effective at most times running the football. But what happened? LaNorris Sellers extended the play. He hit some big passes when blown coverages were happening. But mainly, a lot of the game last week from South Carolina versus Kentucky had a lot to do with the field position that Kentucky was giving South Carolina over and over and over and over again. The multiple turnovers that Kentucky had, the bad punts that they had, those were the things. 9 of the 11 possessions that Kentucky had last week were punts. 9 of the 11 were punts or turnovers. Actually, only 2 turnovers at the end of the game, but the other ones were punts. Then they had 2 field goals in there too. I just think that if you come away in this game and LaNorris Sellers goes 20 of 30 for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, you tip your cap and say, good job, man. And obviously your safety room, your corner room would have had a bad game, and LaNorris Sellers showed more of what he can be as a passer. But I think that that's what you ultimately have to do. It's honestly what I think you did 2 years ago. If Brian Kelly wants to use the analogy on LaNorris Sellers being Anthony Richardson, which, like I told you this week, I did not like that comparison. But the more I looked at it, I could see what he was saying. You got to be able to make him beat you through the air. I didn't put this at number 1 as like, I didn't put this in my keys to victory, but I'm gonna add this in here. Your linebacker room has got to have the best game that they've had this season, and that does include Perk. You know, we had a question earlier in the chat, Blake, what do you do with Perkins? Do you move him to star? And look, here's what I would say at the current moment. I don't want to overreact, and glad that they're not overreacting so far this season, especially Blake Baker. Here's what I would say. Last week, they were very vanilla. They did not do anything that they did with Perkins that they did the week before against USC. I thought Perk, outside of a handful of plays against USC, was pretty disruptive. You know, you remember the tackle for loss that he had in the backfield against USC that forced a punt. He was disruptive at times in the passing game because they keyed on him so much. Multiple times that he got double teamed. I'm personally, now this can come back and backfire on me. I am personally not ready to move away from Perk being at the position that he is. I just think that they were so vanilla last week that it hurt him. I don't think that they're going to be vanilla this week. And we'll talk about why I don't think that they're going to be vanilla, because Blake Baker went against South Carolina last year and was highly aggressive against Dale Loggins and that South Carolina team, which leads me into number 2. So that was our number 1. Here's our number 2. I think that you got to send ungodly amount of pressure. So I just mentioned, look, Blake Baker went against South Carolina last year against Missouri. And I went back last night and rewatched that game. Missouri gave up 269 total yards, and I understand that this is a completely different team for South Carolina, completely different style, but it doesn't stop what I think that they need to do. Blake sent a lot of pressure after South Carolina and really put a lot of strain on their offensive line and put a lot of strain on their wide receivers to make plays that they could not do. Spencer Rattler was very ineffective. I thought he played a really good game, but he just didn't have a lot of help around him. Last year was something that I thought was interesting. I marked down and went back and checked. I had them going 3 of 14 on third down, and that really propelled them. And it's something that we got to talk about. Look, man, you got to get off the field on third down. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. But last year, Blake Baker had his Missouri defense had 5 sacks in the game versus South Carolina. I know that South Carolina wants to come out and run the ball right at you, but if anything of last week is of note, they are going to throw the football around a little bit. They're not going to be they're not going to Les Miles one-dimensional type of deal here. They will throw the football around. And what we saw the last 2 weeks from LaNorris Sellers, I don't think that he understands pressure pickups. You know, I think that what's happened and what happens to kids, and Jane Daniels talked about this a little bit, whether it is Jaden, whether it's Lamar, whoever the quarterback is, you know, even Josh Allen talked about this. Like, they asked Josh Allen a couple of years ago, what's the biggest thing that you had to learn in the NFL? And he's more of a mobile guy. And he says, guys, I had to learn a lot more about how blitzes need to be picked up, hot routes, things like that. These mobile guys, that is something that they have not had a lot of experience in, because they have always felt like they can get away from pressure and be athletic, and which a lot of them can, and we've seen them do it. I just think that over time and what we've seen the last 2 weeks of LaNorris Sellers, I think that you can, I don't want to say easily confuse him as a young quarterback, but I think that you can. You know, Kentucky confused him a lot last week. I think that Blake Baker is very aggressive, but while being aggressive, is very difficult to game plan for because of how they like to do things. I think something that will be very interesting in the passing game versus South Carolina is just how Blake Baker schemes things up to get after LaNorris Sellers. And when you get there, not if, when you get to LaNorris Sellers, because you're going to put pressure on him, you got to bring him down. Guys, he is a big-bodied, but a big-bodied quarterback that does have a really good arm from a power standpoint. When you get there, you got to rally. You got to rally. And here's another thing. When you're sending that ungodly pressure, you know, when we talk about containment and we talk about dual threat guys, you know, something that people didn't do against Jane Daniels well last year was when the guys would come off the edge, they would run right past him and Jaden would just step up and run. You can't do that against LaNorris Sellers. You got to be even with the quarterback when you're rushing to contain him and get after him. Push the pocket in. Here's what I'm going to say, too, about this ungodly pressure. Sean Washington has to have a massive game. Not only in the run game, but he's got to have a big presence in forcing LaNorris Sellers to make quick decisions, because when he gets internal pressure, he's going to have to fire the ball in all different directions. Sean Washington, if you remember during practice reports, there was the last practice that we all went to. Sean Washington absolutely destroyed your interior offensive line. It was how he led the show off. So many, I think 3 or 4 Thursdays ago that Sean Washington came out, guns blazing, uppercutting everybody, just going after this interior offensive line. Had 4 total tackles for loss in that practice, and then had a really good game last week against Nichols. His impact in that interior is going to be something that we're going to have to see work very early in this game, and getting the ball out quickly for LaNorris. Let's make him make quick decisions, and when he does, he has not been highly accurate. So send ungodly pressure. Blake has gone against this offense before. I know it's a lot different from Rattler to Sellers, but 5 sacks last year for Missouri. I think that they're going to do a lot of the same stuff that they did a year ago. Number 3, guys, listen, I can't emphasize this enough. And I know that Emory Jones came out and said yesterday in player interviews that they're going to run the football effectively this week versus South Carolina, and that they have a really good challenge, but they want to run the football. I don't care what the young man says. I really and honestly could care less about what he says, because none of that's true unless you do this first, this number 3 first, to back teams off of you. I'm going to continue to say it. Said it when we talked about the USC preview. Talked about it this past week against Nichols. It was actually my number 1 key to victory last week when we talked about Nichols, which you didn't accomplish really, and you still won because you're just the overall better team. You're going to have to come out guns blazing throwing the football. If you have the situation to do that, if it's the weather's holding off and it's good enough to where you can do it, you're going to have to come out guns blazing. You got to. This is what teams will continue to do to you if you're not careful. Teams are going to continue to stack the box against you because they know that you want to run the football. LSU, Brian Kelly, players, Joe Sloan, everybody has made a big deal that LSU wants to line up and run the football. I don't give 2 Rudy Poos what you think you want to do until you make the adjustment of wanting to sling the rock all over the place and backing teams off of you. You are not going to have the success that you want to have in the running game. I talked about this on Monday. I'm going to talk about this again today. Because you have even though it's technically not the box, there are 9 guys multiple times throughout the Nichols game that are 10 yards or less away from the football. Guys, you have 6 guys blocking 9. Want to know why that you're not having success in the running game? 6 versus 9 is a mismatch. It's a mismatch. And I don't care if you're playing Nicholls State, Rudy Poo State, Dookie Water Tech, as I'm going to make this one because our buddy Sean Anderson's in here helping me produce. I don't care if you're playing Rhode Island. If you have that many guys in the box, you are going to get your shit pushed in. Again, Rudy Poo Tech, Dookie Water State, Southeastern or Nichols or Rhode Island. I don't give 2 Rudy Poos who it is. You got to come out here guns blazing, throwing shots. And if you don't, you're not going to have success. Guys, you could have potentially 2 of the best offensive linemen at tackle in the country. None of that makes any difference to me of how good you are. Like last week, even against USC, Will Campbell is snapping necks and cashing checks like it's the Catalina wine mixer, but it doesn't matter when that many guys are up to the line of scrimmage. Again, I showed you the photo on Monday. I'll show you again. You can't be that condensed. And it's why I've been so aggravated with Joe Sloan. I say aggravated with Joe Sloan, but aggravated in the philosophy and schematical errors that they've done in the running game. Look, I think Joe is a bright offensive coordinator. Really, I do. I don't know how much of experience he has in running game. You know, you have a passing game coordinator in Cortez Hankton. I just don't know if Brad Davis and Brian Kelly don't need to be the voices of what you're doing in the running game, even based off of formations. If Joe wants to run the football, he's got to spread dudes out. You got to be in situations where I'll give you an example. You got to do what Tennessee's doing, which, by the way, throwing this out there, I don't know if you watched Tennessee last week versus NC State. Guys, Lance Hurd is killing human beings. And which brings me to a point that we talked about Monday and Saturday as well in the postgame. Could you have imagined Lance Hurd at right tackle or tackle and bringing Emory Jones into guard? Guys, there's a lot of video on Twitter of Lance Hurd last week. Guys, he on one drive, this is one drive, he had 3 pancakes. And I'm not talking about IHOP. He was, speaking of snapping necks and cashing checks, it's the Catalina wine mixer. Lance Hurd was probably one of the best offensive linemen in the country last week. But what does Tennessee do? To the point that I was trying to make, what do they do effectively? They spread you out and run the football with a guy who, quite honestly, at running back should be here, Dylan Sampson. You got to get numbers out of the box. And if you're going to bring guys into the box, you got to run the ball outside and make them track you down. Guys, it's as simple as that. You want to know why you're not having success? Guys, that's why you're not having success. I don't think it's a personnel issue. I think it's a massive schematical issue. And I say massive. Very massive. So number 3, come out guns blazing, back them off of you. Get them off of you at the line of scrimmage. Make them play deep coverage. The status of Chris Hilton is going to be massive here. I don't know. I'm assuming Brian Kelly will be meeting with the media here in just a moment. He'll be on the SEC teleconference. So we'll get to that on some things that he says here in just a moment. But, man, I tell you this. I'm going to use this analogy one more time. It's like a boxing match, man. It's like Mike Tyson going against Muhammad Ali. If that fight were to ever happen, which it never would have, but if it ever did, Mike Tyson always wanted to get inside, uppercut, hit you to the body, hooks. He wants to fight you in a phone booth. What did Muhammad want to do? He wanted to jab. He wanted to keep his distance. And then once you started backing off of him and you couldn't get close to him, then he started going with ungodly pressure. You got to take smart shots at them to back them off of you. You guys, it's not a request. It's a must. It's a must. Like that, if there is a non-negotiable, that is a non-negotiable. You're not a team that right now at the current moment, like, let me say this. There are things that you can do along your offensive line. Like, for example, wedge blocking. So what is wedge blocking? Your entire offensive line in zone blocking schemes being hit the hip and just pushing people. Screw schematics. Screw everything else. What we used to call wedge blocking was snap the ball, run to the play side, and just push people. Teams that do that have really elite guys in the interior. It's what Brian Kelly did at Notre Dame when he had guys like Quentin Nelson. But you have tackles, and you're limiting your exposure to your tackles when you're bringing everybody in a bunch formation and trying to run the football. Guys, it's ass backwards or bass backwards. Well, I guess it doesn't matter now because I already said it. Number 3 on coming out guns blazing in the run game is a big deal. What is the status of Chris Hilton? And when you come out guns blazing, you know what else that does if you're successful in doing it? It limits that crowd noise. Get them cocks down a little bit. Get the cock fans down a little bit. Boy, that's going to get clipped. Blake Ruffino out of context. That needs to be a Twitter profile. All right. Number 4. Guys, we talked about this in just a moment ago, but let's expand on this. You got to get off the field on third down. Here's the philosophy for every single game that South Carolina is going to go in. They want to run the football. They want to get you in 3rd and 5 or less situations. And then they want to run the football again. They are not guys, South Carolina might be, from an X's and O's standpoint, one of the more simpler teams that you're going to face in the SEC. Because what do? They're going to line up. They're going to do zone reads. They're going to go run QB power. They're going to run power with Rocket Sanders. They're going to run buck sweep. They're going to run buck sweep with a zone read behind it to keep that defensive end at bay and keep him disciplined. But their goal is 3 yards in a cloud of dust, getting the first down on third down in 3rd and short minimal situations, and keep moving the chains. They have no problem. Loggins, Beamer, they have no problem doing 15, 16, 17 play drives. They will do it. We get lost in today's world and in today's society of football when we talk about like flashy wins. Like, for example, Texas last week, come out, throwing it all over the place with Quinn Ewers. Boop, 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 boop. Cam Ward coming out against Florida. Boom, 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 boom. Throwing that thing like it's hot rolls at what's that place in Gulf Shores? What's guys in the chat? What's that place in Gulf Shores, Alabama? The play Lambert's or whatever where they're throwing rolls. That was Cam Ward. Pop, 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 pop. What have the last 3 national championship teams done? They're gonna line up and run the ball right at you. They're gonna run the ball right at you. All right, Paul Sub says it's Lambert's, but it's in Foley. You know what I was talking about. Well, I can go for some rolls right now. Speaking of carnivore diet, I could really go for some rolls right now. Can't do it. Teams that can line up and run the ball right at you and continue to get first downs will beat you 9 times out of 10. It's not flashy. It doesn't look good. Nobody cares about it. But last week, as an example, that was the biggest 86 yards that South Carolina ever had. I mean, they just third down, line it up, run it. 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 Now, they weren't effective last week because Kentucky could get off the field, but it's what they want to do. Last year, Blake Baker was 3 of 14 on third down against South Carolina. He's had some experience with them. He's going to have to utilize that this week. He's going to have to utilize everything that's in his toolbox. Guys, this is the problem that I have with being conservative last week. Because let me throw this at you. If you would have been ultra aggressive last week versus Nichols, you could have really worked on some things and done some things that maybe are not, if this guy doesn't do this well, maybe you could get some different personnel in there. But you have no experience on more things that you want to run with Blake Baker this week and how you want to stop the run. Guys, the front seven's got to be big here. Now, Jacoby and Guillory is out, but the key player in this game is Sean Washington. Harold Perkins, Greg Penn. This game is actually tailored to Greg Penn, if we're being honest. How does he respond? You need your leader on defense, number 18, to come out here and dominate. Because I'm telling you, man, they're going to run the football right at you. So we'll see. All right, number 5, last but not least. When you think of the Beamer family in college football, what do you think about? Now, some of you will say Virginia Tech. You'll say about all the great teams that they had, maybe Michael Vick, whatever it may be. You know what I think about? Special teams. And we never talk about special teams. On this show, we hardly ever talk about special teams, you better be ready at any given moment for any single thing that they're going to do. Like, you know what I think about South Carolina? Something that I would like. Let me give an example. Like, to start off the game, I wouldn't be surprised if they had an onside kick to start the game off. It would not shock me in the slightest if they start a game off, if they defer, like if they win the toss and they defer to the second half, them coming right out and having an onside kick. Because Shane Beamer in special teams is like duck in water, man. They're really good on special teams. Actually, they're phenomenal on special teams. So was his dad. Guys block punts, block kicks, punt return, anything that revolves kickoff return, everything that they do on special teams is going to be Shane Beamer's baby, and it's why they've been top 10 in special teams everywhere that Shane Beamer's gone over the last 6 years. In the top 10. Be highly cautious on every single thing that they do. I'm really playing this thing safe, and I'm telling Xavion Thomas, listen, this might not be the game that you get a lot of return yards unless you can make something happen, but we need to make sure that we get off the field on fourth down. Guys, I have a sneaky feeling inside my bones, like I'm Bruno Mars, that they're going to do something that on special teams that is going to trick you. You have to be aware of every little thing that they do. You know, it's funny. The last time we played South Carolina in Death Valley, if I'm not mistaken, the Leonard Fournette thing or Leonard Fournette game. But remember, wasn't it 2011, maybe 2000? I forget the Colt David. You remember Les came out there, a trick play. No, it was 2007, wasn't it? With Matt Flynn, Colt David, they did the behind the pass thing, and Colt David scored a touchdown. Special teams, man. Special teams.